I wish that he didn't say that, but he did. I mean, come on, let's be real. All of us have, maybe, I don't know, maybe you haven't, but I have. I have in my life over and over again struggled with this one, with this idea of serving God, or loving money and serving money, and the pull on my heart to go both directions. It really is something that it's a part of what God has been speaking to me and what he's been talking to me about for a long time, really for like several months now. It really began out of this idea that he was speaking to me about the cost of discipleship, what it really means, what it really requires to be a disciple. You might remember a couple weeks ago, I talked about that in a message about the cost of discipleship. And what I quoted Glenn and said that there are a lot of churches in America that are filled. I'm trying not to be oaky with that. First service, I totally bombed it. I'm trying to be filled. There are a lot of churches in America that are filled with forgiven people who look just like the world. And money is one of the main places where people in God's family look just like the world. Because we're forgiven, but we haven't paid the cost of discipleship to be transformed and changed. Jesus talks about this all the time. It's really amazing that we don't talk about it more. Really, we should. In the American church, we should talk about money a lot because Jesus talked about it a lot. I've only preached on money twice, and this is number 2. Jesus, though, talks about it all the time. In fact, he talks more about money than heaven and hell combined. In all of his parables, I got that wrong. Let me check my facts here. Half of all of Jesus' parables deal with material possessions or money. Half of all of the parables he told. If you look at the first 3 Gospels, 1 verse out of every 6 deals with this topic. It's a big deal to God because of what we're talking about today. You can't serve God and money. I wish he didn't say it, but he did. And so we're going to talk about it this morning. And to talk about it, I want you to turn with me in your Bibles to Luke chapter 16. And we're going to begin in verse 9. To set the stage there a little bit, I encourage all of you to go read the first 8 verses there, verse 1 through 8. It's a parable that Jesus told about the shrewd manager, and it's really an odd story. Like you read it and it's kind of weird because Jesus is talking about this manager of money who's really shrewd and how he deals with stuff and how he deals with his boss's money and how he handles his possessions. And so it's this really interesting story, this parable that Jesus tells. And then we get to verse 9. And he concludes this parable by saying, Jesus says, I'm telling you that although wealth is often used in dishonest ways, you should use it to make friends for yourselves. It just keeps getting weirder, right? Okay, so Jesus, are you just telling me that I should use money to buy people? Like I can buy friends? No, that's not what Jesus is saying. We'll dive into this in just a little bit. When life is over, you will be welcomed into an eternal home. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with a lot. Whoever is dishonest with very little is dishonest with a lot. Therefore, if you can't be trusted with wealth that is often used dishonestly, who will trust you with wealth that is real, meaning spiritual truth, real wealth? If you can't be trusted with someone else's wealth, who will give you your own? A servant cannot serve 2 masters. He will hate the first master and love the second, or he will be devoted to the first master and despise the second. You cannot serve God and money. Now, Jesus is telling us this parable. He's speaking, and the group that he's speaking to are actually a bunch of Pharisees. These are the religious leaders that are supposed to know how to lead the people in doing what's right. They're supposed to be the spiritual authority and leaders for this whole group of people that Jesus is speaking to. But these Pharisees it goes on to say, the Pharisees dearly loved money. So when they heard what Jesus said, they made fun of him. Now, I can just kind of picture these Pharisees like mocking and joking, like, oh yeah, it's easy for you to say, you're broke. Like, we got stuff. Like, I can just hear like these sarcastic slights and these little comments and jabs and things that the Pharisees would be saying to Jesus. But he says, he knows what they're saying, and he says, but Jesus told them, you're always making yourselves look good, but God sees what's in your heart. And this next thing that he says, if you only get this, and you leave here today, and you think about this verse over and over and over, and it gets into you, and it radicalizes your life, then I've done my job, and we've just begun. Because this next sentence should change your life. You're always making yourself look good, but God sees what's in your heart. The things that most people think are important are worthless as far as God is concerned. The things that most of us think are really, really important are worthless as far as God is concerned. He's speaking to this religious group of Pharisees who are so caught up in making themselves look good and act good and do the right thing and impress people. And he says, all this stuff that you think is so important, it's worthless to God because he looks at your heart and he knows what's really going on, because you can't serve God and money. It's impossible. The other thing that he says, he talks in this parable in the first 8 verses of this chapter in Luke 16, and he's talking about this parable of this money manager who handles his money shrewdly. He handles the money that he's been entrusted very shrewdly, in a very shrewd manner. And so because of that, Jesus points this out, and he says, for worldly people are more shrewd in handling their affairs than those who belong to the light. One other reason why Jesus gives us this principle is that as Christians, we should be different in handling our money than the world does. And a lot of us, myself included, don't handle money as well as we should. We don't take what is given to us and manage it properly. It's hard to do, but the truth is, either you manage your money or your money will manage you. How many of you have ever been in a place where at the end now, maybe it's just me, and that's okay. I'll be like the lone duck here, but I want, like, this is a public thing. I'm gonna take a poll. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you got to the end of your money and there was a whole lot of month left? Anybody ever been there? Yeah. It happens, right? But Jesus says it doesn't have to. And it goes back to this. Do you love God or do you love money? Because it all begins in your heart. And so he gives us these principles. And I want to give you today 4 don'ts to do with your dough. And I also want to give you 4 principles to put God first instead of money. So I want to begin with these 4 don'ts. And the first one is simply, don't waste it. Don't waste what God has given to you. Don't waste your money. Luke 16 says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. It's easy to waste. It's easy to, I'm taking another poll here real quick. How many of you have ever gotten a large sum of money all at one time? Maybe it was a couple $100, maybe it was several $1,000s, maybe it was even huger than that, and I really don't know what that feels like. So how many of you have ever gotten like this huge chunk of money and then like you looked back in just a little bit of time and you're like, what happened? Like, I had plans for all of that. Like, I was gonna do some stuff, and where did it go? Anybody besides me ever? Okay, even more than the first time. Awesome. You guys are doing good with the polls today. How many people want the Cubs to win the World Series? Oh, a lot less hands than I thought I'd see there. Darn. There's a guy that we're connected to. His name's Billy Epperhart. And he says, he's got this quote, he says, it's easy to turn a little into a lot The hard part is getting a little. And that really is true. It's easier to turn accumulation into greater accumulation, but the hard part is you got to get something together to start with. And it's because money is so easy to waste. So simply put, don't waste it. The second thing is, don't love it or live for it. Luke 16, verse 13. This is our key verse for today. No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money. You can't do it. You can't have a divided allegiance. It's like working for two bosses. I once had a job 6, 7 years ago where I had 5 bosses. Literally. Like I reported the org chart. It gets up to that point, and like where I report to, there's 5 guys up there. Ridiculous. Like every day, the good part was that every day was brand new. You walk in, what's gonna happen today? I have no idea. Depends on who's in the office, who showed up, what priorities they set. The bad part is every day was disaster and stress because I'm always doing it wrong compared to somebody else. I'm always torn, always gonna mess it up because what this guy says I should do, this guy disagrees with. It was painful. And that looks a lot like Christians who live their lives torn between the love of money and the love of God. We wanna live our lives this way. We wanna pursue some stuff. And I'll be real honest with you. Like, if you want dudes, I'll give you my man card, but I like to look at Pinterest. And it's out there, I put it out there. I like to look at Pinterest and I like to look for ways to expand our house. Like, if I had just unending funds, I would just build on forever. I don't know why that's a thing for me, but I would love to do that. And so it's really easy for this love of money to grip my heart. But God's been speaking to me for months about the cost of discipleship and what it really requires and what he's really asking for. And he's not asking for my money. He's not. And this message is not about, we're not gonna end this service taking up an offering. I'll just let you off the hook now. You can text it in. It's okay. We're not going to do that because this message is not about what we give. It's about your heart. It's about, do you live in your heart? What do you love? Do you love God? And you'll do what he asks you, and you'll give where he asks you, and you'll use the money he gives you for things that he asks you to use it for, or do you love money? It's easy to get there. And it really is incredible. I thought many of you were here last week, and we were overwhelmingly honored, and I was completely surprised, and it was totally unexpected. And in the middle of all of this, God has been speaking to me about the cost of discipleship and what it means, and sacrificing our style and standard of living for purposes for his kingdom. And Steph and I have had conversations about, there are some things that we just can't do. There are some things that we're not going to be able to do with the frequency that we used to want to do them. And then in all of that, things like cycling and enjoying that sport together. And then Jesus says, because you laid it down, I'm going to bless you to go do it. It's amazing. Thank you so much for loving us that much. And the amazing thing of that is that in all of that, we had made that decision and laid it down. And then God comes behind it and says, because, here you go. I'm reminded of Solomon, who was asked by God, I'll give you anything you want. What do you ask? What do you want me to give you? And he says, give me wisdom so that I can rule your people well. And God says, because you didn't ask for money, because you didn't ask for kingdoms, because you didn't ask for fame, I'll give you all of that and the wisdom you asked for. This is a principle that goes way deeper than the stuff in your pocket or purse. It's a matter of the heart. You can't serve God and money. So don't love it or live for it. Don't trust it for security. Proverbs 23:5 says, your money can be gone in a flash, as if it had grown wings and flown away like an eagle. How many of you have experienced that? Your money, your stock options, your 401k. Anybody, one more poll. Anybody here had a 401k in 2007, 2008 that you were feeling pretty good about, and then by like 2009, 2010, it was a lot less? Yeah. It's so easy to hang on to that and to trust it for security. Like, I've got this stuff and now we're okay. And God says you can't do that because it's fleeting. And I'm really appreciative of the United States government. They make this easy for us. The U.S. Treasury, they just put an eagle right there on every bill. So you can read that. It says, as if it had grown wings and flown away like an eagle. And they just remind you all the time, you're not going to hang on to this for long. Here you go. Now give it back. Here you go. Now give it back. Some say money talks, but it really doesn't. It just grows wings and flies away. It never has to say a word. It's really, really easy. So don't trust it for security. And don't expect it to satisfy. This is hard. This is a don't to do with your dough that is really difficult. Don't expect it to satisfy. You know, there have been times in my life when I got my first real job. I was working as an IT guy for American Airlines. I was in the Sabre group, and so as a guy out of high school, I was making pretty good money, and things were happening, and I was pretty excited about that. And I bought a house, and things were cool. But I had this thought, okay, God, things are pretty good, but if I could just make $10,000 more, that would be awesome. And then, a couple years go by and you get to that point. You're like, hey, yeah, things are improving. And you're like, but God, if I could just have 10,000 more per year, then it would really be good. Because there's always just that little bit. Somebody interviewed Howard Hughes once. He asked him, what does it take to satisfy a man? This guy has everything. And he says, just a little bit more. Always looking for just a little bit more. Ecclesiastes 5:10 says, whoever loves money will never have enough. And whoever loves wealth will never be satisfied with his income. Man, I know what that's like. And you can't look to it for satisfaction because it will never satisfy. In fact, whatever you love, you'll always want more of. So instead of looking to the love of money, because then you're always going to need just a little bit more, what if we look to the love of God? So we get to a point where, God, I just want a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more of you. That's the place to be. Not over here loving money, but instead over here saying, if there's something that I want a little bit more of to satisfy me, God, open me up. Pour into this. Hudson Taylor wrote, he was praying once in Chicago. And in this time of prayer, he was so overwhelmed and so filled. Man, there it is again. Filled. He was so filled with the presence of God that he had to pray and ask God, God, please stay your hand. Take it back. This is too much. I've never been there. I've never been in a place where God's love and his life and his light shining on me and just the power of his presence was so overwhelming that I had to plead with him to stop because it was just too much. I want that. That's the love that I want just a little bit more of and a little bit more of and a little bit more of. Because the love of money, it will never satisfy. Don't do it. Don't waste it. Don't love it or live for it. Don't put your trust in it for your security, and don't expect it to satisfy because it never will. And then there are 4 more things that I want to give you this morning. 4 principles that are counterculture to putting God first instead of money. And I hope that these speak to you. The first one is simply put, God owns everything. I'm just his money manager. God owns it all. I'm just here to manage what he gives me. Here's a little tidbit for you. Whatever it is that you have, it belonged to somebody else before it got to you. And when you're gone, it's going on to somebody else. It's just yours while you're here to take care of it, to steward it, to manage it. In and out. It's simple. God owns everything. Proverbs 27, verse 1. Psalm 27, verse 1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." That means all the money, all the minerals in the earth, all the mountains, all the rivers, all the birds, all the sky, everything is the Lord's. He really owns it all. He's just given it to you and I to manage and steward while we're here. So let me ask you a question. How are you doing with that? How are you in managing what God has given to you? How are you doing? Not just your money, but everything He's given to you. Your car, your house, your skills, your gifts, your talents. What has He given to you to manage and to use? Because it all belongs to Him, and He's given it to you to manage while you're here. Second, my heart always goes where I put God's money. There are a few things that I want you to see here, and the first one is simply, I'm convinced that God uses money more than anything else to show what I love most. I'm convinced that God uses money to show where our heart really is, because this is true. This principle, my heart always goes where I put God's money. You know, my heart turned towards Haiti when Steph and I started giving towards it. Once I was invested in that country, then I began to really pray for Pastor Nerval and the churches in Haiti. I began to care about what was happening and who we were reaching. Incidentally, there is a table in the foyer today, and you can buy for $14 a life straw, filter straw, that we're taking to Haiti on Thursday. A group of people from Destiny Life are going to Haiti. It was already planned before the hurricane came through. And so we're excited about being able to help them and support them, Pastor Nerval and the churches we're connected to there. And so I encourage you to stop by the table and find out more about how you can be a part of that. But let me ask it a different way. What if you probably have no idea how Apple or Microsoft or Google or whoever else is doing right now in their stock, unless you own some? What if somebody gave you 1,000 shares of the biggest company? All of a sudden, you'd really start to care how they were doing from day to day. All of a sudden, it would begin to matter to you, because where your money is, that's where your heart is. It's a truth that we have to understand. Jesus said, "Don't store up treasures here on earth. Instead, store your treasures in heaven. For wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart will be." Whenever I live for my money, it becomes my master. Whenever I give my money, it becomes my servant. We have to understand that we have to love God and not our money. It really all comes down to what's in your heart, just like Jesus said. I know what's in your heart, and He sees it. It also shows what I trust. It shows what I love most, and it shows what I trust. Proverbs 11 says, "If you trust in your money, you will fall. But if you trust in God, you'll flourish like a green tree." It says that if I put my trust in this money, then it will eventually evade, disappear, grow wings, and fly away. But if I put my trust in God, see, the problem with that is that when I put my trust in money, like my job, I'm making that my source, and I'm limiting where my provision comes from. When I put my trust in God, it opens up heaven. He can do anything He wants. He can make stuff just multiply. He can put coins in a fish's mouth. He can do whatever He wants to do because He owns it all, and He's God anyway. I'll never forget a time when Steph and I were walking through some tight financial stuff. The company that I was telling you about, that I worked for 5 bosses, there was a time there where we took a 10% pay cut, and then took another 10% pay cut. And so it was really kind of difficult. We were walking through some real challenges there. Just financially, things were tight. And out of nowhere, Y'all ever seen that show? I don't even remember what it's called. Maybe you can help me, love. But it's the Louisiana guys, and they've got like oil wells or something. And so they have this thing called mailbox money. And anybody ever seen that show? Oh, one guy. Thank you, Charles. I appreciate it. We can talk about it later. But like that happened for us. Like we started joking about it. Like, hey, we got some mailbox money. Like stuff that, it was crazy. Like when Hillcrest Hospital bought Claremore Regional, they did an audit of their finances, and they found out that 3 years prior to that, when Ethan, our 6-year-old, was born, he was 3 at the time, 3 years prior to that, we had overpaid them by $300. So they gave us a refund back. Here's $300 that you overpaid us 3 years ago. We're like, what hospital does that? It's crazy. Like, there was another time when, in the same period of time, we had overpaid our escrow account, which is all like the banks take care of that, and we didn't really do it on purpose. It could just kind of happen. And so they sent us this refund check. Here's your escrow overbalance. Okay, awesome. Like it became really fun to go check the mail. Like, I'll go check the mail today. It's okay. Because it wasn't where our security was. It wasn't where our trust was in. Our provision was not in this job that I had taken pay cut after pay cut, decrease after decrease. Our provision was in God, and He was our source. And it doesn't matter. He takes care of it because it all belongs to Him. And it shows that I can trust Him. And it also shows that God can trust me. Out of control finances reveal an out of control life. If you don't bring things in, like I said before, if you don't manage your money, it will manage you easily. In Luke chapter 16, Jesus said, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. If you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Jesus says, how I handle my money determines if God can bless my life. Understand that. It's a big deal because it's a matter of your heart. He doesn't care about the money. I don't care about the money. I don't care if you tithe here or if you tithe to some televangelist. My goal, my concern is your heart in giving. Because my desire is to see you live for God and love Him so deeply and so passionately that whatever you make doesn't matter because your heart is fixed. Your eyes are fixed on the author and perfecter of your faith. That He is your joy. He is your hope. He is your satisfaction. He is your trust and your provision. And that you love Him so much more than anything else that money could bring. That's my desire, my hope for you. And the way to do that, giving generously, is the only antidote to the love of money. The love of money or greed evades us so much. It's so easy to just kind of gloss over because it's easy for us to justify greed. The opposite of generous giving is not nothing, not no giving. The opposite of generous giving is coveting. And if you covet things, if you see things happen, man, I wish I had that. Man, I covet what that person has, or that person's job, or that person's income, or their car, or their boat, or their house, or whatever it is. The opposite of that is not stop coveting. The opposite of that is start giving generously. It will break covetousness in your life. I guarantee you. That's how God broke it in me, is breaking. Let's be honest. This is real because God challenges us to give generously. Luke chapter 16, verse 9 says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, it will welcome you into your eternal dwelling. What he's saying there is not buy your friends. He's not saying use your money to gather a bunch of people around you. What he means by friends there are bringing people into the kingdom. Real friends, real companions, so that when you enter into your eternal dwelling, they'll be there to welcome you home. Really, really sappy Ray Boltz song, Thank You. Anybody ever heard that? I love that song, though. Ray Boltz had some jams back in the day. I just picture that when you get to heaven, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of people there that are saying, because of you, because you gave generously, I'm here. It's right there. Give so that you're winning friends into the kingdom forever. That's what we're supposed to do. It's about giving generously, not just giving, because it's really easy. Jesus in another place was talking to the Pharisees, and he said, you tithe as you should, even your spices, your dill and your cumin. Like they were tithing 10% of everything as they should. But then he goes on to say, but you're disobeying the weightier parts of the law, as if to say, tithing is just the beginning. Like this is where you start with tithing. You tithe as you should, but you're not paying attention to the weightier parts of the law. Tithing is where we start, and then our generous giving should go beyond that and above that. That's just being obedient to God. And then what really happens out of us, what we're really doing to manage what God brings into us, and how he challenges us to step out in faith and test us with our trust in him to be our provision. That's when it gets hard, when the rubber meets the road and it starts to hurt a little bit because I'm letting go of this thing that's got a death grip on my back pocket, the love of money. And he says, maybe some of you today need to start with that. Maybe you've never stepped out to begin to tithe. Maybe you've been tithing for a long time and you've learned to give 10% and then live on 90, and now your thinking is, I'll just get the biggest 90 I can. God says maybe it's time to start with 11% or 12% or whatever it takes to begin to bring that into balance, because you can't love God and money. Jesus said it, and I wish he hadn't. And then finally he says, God prospers me not to raise my standard of living, but to raise my standard of giving. This whole issue of giving is about my heart and what I'm going to do with what God gives me. All of it comes down to, what are you doing in your heart towards what God brings to you? Is he bringing stuff into you, and can he trust you with more? Because if he can, then he will prosper you, not to raise your standard of living, but to raise your standard of giving. He wants to increase you so that you can be a blessing to others. In his book, The Treasure Principle, Randy Alcorn, little plug there, it's a great little read. Short read, a lot of today's message comes out of that. But he says, you don't own the store, you just work here. You don't own your life and all your stuff in it. You just work here. It's like, what if the FedEx guy came and instead of delivering the package to you, he took it home and he kept it for himself? It's not his job. His job is to deliver the package. Well, that's what God is saying to all of us this morning about how to handle our money. My job is not to keep it for myself. My job is to deliver what God gives me to deliver. I don't own the store, I just work there. You don't own all the things that God has given to you. He's just given it to you to manage and to use. So I want to ask you right now just to bow your heads and close your eyes, and I want to ask you a few questions. Just a little honest self-evaluation right now. Some of you have said, well, when I get rich and famous, then I'll give the church a huge tithe, or I'll really start giving. No, you won't. You won't. If you're not faithful with little, you won't be faithful with much. Jesus said it. So let me ask you, does God really have first place in your life? Ask yourself, can God trust me with what he's allowed me to have? Can he trust you with what he's given to you? Does the way you're using money show that God can be trusted? Show God that you can be trusted with more? Ask yourself, what am I investing for eternity? Who will be in heaven because of me? Finally, ask yourself, be honest. Am I serving God or am I serving money? Father, thank you that you sent Jesus to this earth to give. He gave his life for us. And I pray that you would help us to have a heart that's in love with you, so that we're open to give the way that you call us to look at money as a tool and a resource that you bring into our lives, not something to gain and acquire and store up here on earth. I pray that you would help us to be so deeply, passionately in love with you that it takes everything everything from you to satisfy us, and nothing that this world has to offer. I pray that you would make us sound stewards and managers of what you bring, provision and the resource that you bring into our lives, and prove to you that we can be trusted with even more. Father, I thank you that your provision, your blessing, your favor is on this place, on this family, in Destiny Life, and you have been blessing and giving us increase and more. And I pray that your countenance would continue to shine upon us, and it would continue for every family at Destiny Life. That we would be, when we're called to give account for all that you've given to us, we would be found faithful stewards. We didn't love money, we loved you. Search our hearts and know the truth. Reveal to us areas and places of our own life where you're calling us to lay it down and to love you completely. Thank you for saying that we cannot serve God and money. In Jesus' name, amen.